Before she was a prisoner, before the jeering crowds and the guillotine, Marie Antoinette was the heartbeat of Versailles, a woman surrounded by chandeliers, silks, and endless applause. To the people of France, she was either a goddess or a monster, depending on who you asked. But in the summer of 1789, the golden world she ruled began to crack. For years, rumors had painted her as Madame Deficit, the Austrian who drained France's treasury on jewels, gowns, and masquerades. Every famine, every debt, every hungry child became her fault. She wasn't just hated. She was blamed for everything that was wrong with France. And when revolution came, it wasn't just politics. It was vengeance. The queen who once ruled from gilded halls now found herself trapped inside them. Versailles became a cage. The whispers in the corridors grew louder than the music in the ballrooms. Each night her guards doubled. Each morning, the mob outside grew bolder. The woman who once commanded courtiers with a glance now clutched her children, praying the next sunrise wouldn't bring blood. In October 1789, that prayer failed. Thousands of women stormed Versailles, armed with pikes, torches, and fury. They broke into her chambers, shouting for her head. She fled barefoot through secret corridors, her heart pounding as the mob poured in. By dawn, the Queen of France was dragged to the balcony to face them. Shouts turned to silence as she stood alone before the masses, her white gown trembling in the wind. For a moment she bowed her head, and the crowd unexpectedly fell quiet. It was the last time her grace would save her. Forced to leave Versailles, she and her family were taken to Paris, not as rulers, but as prisoners in plain sight. The Tuileries Palace became their new prison, surrounded by guards who watched, reported, and waited. Letters were intercepted, food was poisoned, allies disappeared. At night, she wrote secret notes to her brother in Austria, hoping for rescue, knowing it might never come. By 1791, her husband's failed attempt to escape sealed their fate. The royal family was caught in Varennes and dragged back through towns filled with people spitting, cursing, and throwing mud. The monarchy's illusion shattered completely. The king was no longer His Majesty, he was just citizen Capet, and Marie Antoinette and the foreign queen became a symbol of everything the revolution wanted to destroy. The crown was gone. The safety gone. The world she had known had turned to dust. But for Marie Antoinette, the true suffering hadn't even begun. What came next would strip her not only of her throne, but of her very humanity. The queen who once slept beneath ceilings painted with angels now lay beneath a dripping stone ceiling in the conciergerie, the final stop before the guillotine. Her name was no longer Marie Antoinette. To her guards, she was simply prisoner number 280. The walls were damp. The air smelled of rot and despair. Mice crept over the straw near her bed. A single candle lit her face, pale, thinner than ever, yet still impossibly proud. The revolution had stripped her of everything. Her throne, her jewels, her husband. But what they craved most was her dignity. And she refused to give them that. In the beginning, they allowed her a few comforts, a maid, small meals, even letters. But as the hatred outside grew, the walls closed in. Her maid was taken away. Her food was reduced to scraps. Her guards were instructed to never look away, not even as she slept or changed. She was never alone. Even her silence was watched. And then came the cruelest wound of all, the loss of her son, the little Dauphin. Her boy was only 8 when they dragged him from her arms, declaring he must be re-educated. For months she begged to see him, but the guards only laughed. They forced the child to live with drunkard wardens who beat him and taught him to curse his own mother. When word reached her that her son had accused her of crimes, lies taught by his captors, she fainted. The revolution had not only taken her family, it had made her child a weapon against her. In her cell, Marie began to unravel, and yet she also transformed. Gone was the queen of fashion and laughter. In her place stood something harder, colder, a woman of silence and faith. Each night she whispered prayers not for rescue, but for courage. She mended her torn gown with thread she pulled from her bedding. She wrote letters she knew would never reach anyone, just to remind herself she could still feel. The guards called her the widow Capet now, mocking her for the husband who had already been executed. But she no longer flinched at the name. If Louis was gone, she would follow him with her head held high, and as the echo of the prison bell faded each night, She would stare at the flickering flame beside her bed, the last light left in her world, and whisper to herself, "They can break my body, but not my soul." By October 1793, the whispers in the corridors of the conciergerie turned into footsteps, heavy, deliberate, final. Marie Antoinette was to face trial before the Revolutionary Tribunal, but it was never a trial. It was an execution dressed in words. They dragged her through the corridors, pale and weak, her wrists bound with rope. As she entered the courtroom, the crowd gasped, not because they pitied her, but because of what she had become. The powdered Queen of Versailles was gone. In her place stood a hollow figure, dressed in a plain black gown, hair roughly cut, eyes dim but still defiant. The judges sat high above her, smirking. The hall was filled with men who had already decided her fate. The charges were read aloud: treason, conspiracy, theft, and most cruelly, corruption of her own son. That last accusation was a dagger. Her child had been brainwashed into claiming that she had abused him. The audience jeered, hungry for blood, while Marie sat motionless, a single tear falling silently down her cheek. Then, at last, she spoke. Her voice, thin but sharp as a blade, cut through the noise. "If I have not answered, it is because nature refuses to respond to such a charge made against a mother. I appeal to all mothers here." The hall went silent. For a brief moment, even her accusers lowered their eyes. But compassion had no place in the new France. The prosecutor, Fouquier-Tinville, turned her words against her, twisting everything she said into guilt. They claimed she plotted with foreign kings, that she sent secret messages through laundry women, that her every breath was treason. It didn't matter that no proof existed. The verdict was written before she walked in. For 2 days she endured the farce. No rest, no food, no mercy. She was forced to stand the entire time, her legs trembling, but she never begged. The more they tried to break her, the calmer she became. Even her enemies began to sense it, the quiet power of a woman who had nothing left to lose. When the final judgment came, she bowed her head slightly, as though greeting an old friend. "Death," the judge announced. A faint smile flickered across her lips. In that instant, the courtroom realized the revolution could kill her body, but it could not conquer her spirit. The next morning, the Queen of France would rise for the last time. Not to wear a crown, but to meet her destiny. October 16th, 1793, the hour before dawn. Inside the conciergerie, Marie Antoinette awoke for the last time. The sound of drums echoed faintly from outside, a reminder of what awaited her. Her guards entered without a word. She rose slowly from her straw mattress, clutching her thin shawl. Her body was frail, her face pale from sickness and starvation, yet there was a strange calm about her. She asked for a priest to the Abbé Girard, and together they whispered prayers. When he offered her a final blessing, she bowed her head. "Now," she said softly, "the time has come." They dressed her in a plain white gown, the color of mourning in France. Her hair was cut short, roughly, so it wouldn't interfere with the blade. The guard shackled her hands and she didn't resist. As they led her to the cart, the morning light broke over the Seine, cold and colorless. Outside, a crowd had gathered, tens of thousands waiting to see the fallen queen. She was forced to climb into an open wooden cart, the same one used for thieves and murderers. The priest sat beside her, the soldiers ahead. The drums began to beat. For nearly an hour they rolled through the streets of Paris. People screamed, spat, cursed her name. "Witch!" they shouted. "Murderess!" But Marie Antoinette did not answer. She didn't cry, didn't look away. Instead, she held her head high and stared straight ahead, her lips moving in prayer. A few witnesses later said her eyes were not those of a condemned woman, but of someone already far beyond fear. When the cart reached the Place de la Révolution, the guillotine loomed above the crowd like a dark god. The executioner approached to bind her hands tighter. She looked at him and whispered, "Do not hurt me more than necessary." Her voice was calm, almost kind. Climbing the steps, she accidentally stepped on his foot. Her last words were simple. "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to do it." The drums rolled again. The blade fell at 12:15 p.m. A gasp swept through the crowd. Not triumph, but something colder, heavier. For all their hatred, they had just witnessed something rare. A woman walking to her death with more grace than most ever live with. Her body was thrown into a common grave, unmarked. But even in the silence that followed, the echo of that white figure in the cart, unbowed, unbroken, refused to die. The blade had fallen. The crowd that once screamed for blood now stood in uneasy silence. The woman they had called Madame Deficit, the Austrian witch, and the enemy of the people lay still. Her final expression calm, almost peaceful. Marie Antoinette was gone. But her story was not. Her body was buried in a shallow, unmarked grave in the Madeleine Cemetery, thrown among countless others who had met the same fate. No crown, no name, no flowers. The revolution wanted to erase her, to make her memory disappear as easily as her breath had. But memory has a way of surviving where flesh cannot. In the days that followed, even her enemies whispered of her composure. Soldiers spoke of her steady walk, her calm voice, her refusal to plead. Some who had mocked her began to wonder if they had killed more than a queen, perhaps something sacred in themselves. Years later, when the monarchy was briefly restored, her remains were found and reburied with honor beside her husband, King Louis XVI. But by then, Marie Antoinette had already become more than royalty. She was legend. To some, she remained a symbol of decadence, a queen who lived in luxury while her people starved. But to others, she became something entirely different, a symbol of dignity in destruction, grace under cruelty, and the endurance of a woman who faced hell without surrender. The revolution had stripped her of everything, her jewels, her titles, her family, her life, but not her essence. That part, the part they could never chain, became immortal. And in that immortality her image changed. Painters, poets, and historians began to look again, to see not just the queen who wore diamonds, but the mother who lost her children, the prisoner who faced humiliation, the woman who bowed her head only in prayer. 2 centuries later, her name still echoes, not in palaces but in the human heart's quiet understanding of tragedy. She was born to rule, forced to suffer, and died to remind the world that power means nothing without grace. The revolution won the battle. But Marie Antoinette, in her silence, won something deeper, the final word. Her legacy is not carved in marble, nor written on crowns. It lives in that single haunting image, a pale woman in white, walking through the jeering streets, her hands bound, her soul free. They killed the queen, but in doing so, they created something far greater, a legend that time could never bury.